The transparency, the openness, the communication is more than you could expect. I'm sold.
Don't let the fact that you don't know something or don't know enough about something hold you back.
I knew I wanted to invest. What better way to invest than to invest in what I already know that I love, which is real estate.
It was initially the 12% return, but it quickly turned into the people.
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Multifamily Masterclass Podcast. I'm Bart Diehl, the Director of Investor Relations here at Neighborhood Ventures, and today I'm joined by some awesome special guests, our CEO, Jamison Manwaring, and our Director of Finance, Heidi Butler. Today we have a pretty exciting slate of things we want to go over. The first topic is everyone's favorite topic. We're going to go over some politics. The second topic is some market insights. And the third is we're going to talk about grown adults still living at home.
Are you speaking out of experience for that one, or are you just...
If I could still live at home, I would.
Yeah, you're getting into some controversial topics.
Yeah.
Politics, we're not supposed to talk about in the workplace. We already know that, and here we go. So, yeah, this will be fun.
Great. Well, the first article we'll touch on is a New York Times article, and it's talking about the Biden administration rent caps. So before we dive in, I want to give a little bit of context as to why the Biden admin wrote a rent cap proposal in the first place. In the article, it states rents have surged 26% nationally since early 2020. That increase has exceeded overall inflation. In 2022, a Harvard report found that 50% of all U.S. tenants, a record high, were cost burdened spending more than 30% of their income on rent. So in this New York Times article, it talks about how in mid-July, the White House called on Congress to pass legislation giving corporate landlords, defined by the White House as those with over 50 rental units, a choice to cap annual rent increases on existing units at 5% annually or lose federal tax breaks based on property depreciation. So I'm not asking you guys to choose a side, but if this legislation were to go through, what are some of the consequences of potentially imposing the Biden 5% annual rent cap rate on corporate landlords?
One of the first things I think of is when we go and look at properties like our company does, mid-size apartments. Usually they're, family-owned, kind of ran, and people haven't taken rents up in 5+ years.
Yeah.
Really under market. And part of the value for us is knowing that we can bring it up to the standard market rate. Now, that's not a 5% rent increase, but it needs to come up to the current market. So it's kind of this hard balance for me of, I understand wanting to cap and not let people gouge, renters, that 30% of your income. That's kind of what I look at more, but it's really hard capping us at 5%.
Yeah, and I think that's why they want to cap us or cap developers and people who are kind of speculating in real estate. They want to put that cap on because they kind of want to paint a picture that landlords are now the bad guy, So there's always kind of a bad guy that politicians point to during different election cycles. Sometimes it used to be Wall Street. Sometimes it's the pharmaceuticals industry. It's the healthcare industry. It's mortgage brokers. It's realtors. There's always kind of a bad guy. But the big thing with the proposal is when it came out, it was pretty clear that it was more for political reasons. Now Biden has obviously withdrawn from running, so the proposal's really gone by the wayside. Harris has not come out and said that she wants to do something similar, but maybe she will. But it would be very unprecedented to do a national rent cap across the board nationally, and it would be a bad thing in our opinion. And you might say, well, you're biased because you're in the apartment industry and owning apartments. And so when rents go up, that's a positive for us. So granted, we might be biased, but I also think we have to look at what's happened historically when rent caps have gone into play. And, I lived in New York for a while, and there are a lot of properties that are rent stabilized, rent controlled. And most of those properties are in really rough shape because the landlord cannot make enough money from the property to put anything back into maintenance. And that's what ends up happening is if you own a property and the revenue, there's not enough operating income to put it into maintenance, then it turns into what they call a slumlord, where you're just collecting the rent And the people are never going to move out because they have rent controls, and they just let them go down the tube. And that we see that in New York. We've also seen in other places across the country, in different cities and municipalities and even states that have brought in rent caps. What it does is developers and builders decide not to go build in those areas. And that is a bad thing for those areas, because now there isn't enough supply to meet the demand in that area. And we are in obviously a capitalistic system where supply and demand is what runs the show. So let's point to Phoenix. We've had great growth of population here. And you would think, because of all the demand from housing in Arizona, that rents would be through the roof over the last few years, because we've had a lot of people moving here. TSMC and all of the growth that we've had. And rents have been flat now for 2 years. And that's because there's a lot of supply of new apartments that have come on the market. And that was driven by the free market, government-friendly state policies that were put into place. And developers come in and saying, I want to build and plant my flag in Arizona for a long time. So, we're going to be apolitical here, but politicians will say certain things that sound like they make sense. This is definitely one that doesn't make sense in our economy. You can't just keep giving people stuff. We can't just keep writing off everyone's student loans and giving them all these subsidies. It just does not work. And can you imagine if the government said, we're going to cap the price of gas across the board, or we're going to cap what Apple can sell a cell phone for to keep the price for consumers? So they're pointing to landlords as the bad guy. So we're going to go attack the bad guy, and that's going to solve everyone's problem.
I think it's exactly what you're talking about, though. It's like the summary of it is, it's a great tagline that's not taking into account the ripple effect of what it does to the economy overall. Yeah. It's just everyone looks at it, they think that's a great idea. If you're a renter, you love it, but you're not looking at the ripple effect of what will happen by that choice.
One of the key data points in here is that this policy, if approved, would affect about 20 million units in the country. So roughly half of all rental properties. So if there's a gauge on profits, we're going to see less development, and that would be really bad for the amount of demand for housing to meet the supply that there is right now.
Yeah, it really was a way to try to get some headlines, to try to get people excited about his campaign again. After the announcement was made that he wanted to do this, it faded away fairly quickly, because as people really looked at how they were going to try to do it, because federal government doesn't have the authority to just do that across the board. So they were going to take away some tax incentives, and very kind of convoluted way. It faded away very quickly. So I don't think this is something that's likely from either of these administrations to actually be implemented. I think it will definitely come up again because people are concerned with their costs across the board. But we have to keep in mind that rents have flatlined the last few years. The cost of a lot of other things are going up. Rent has not. But as we look out over the next few years, rents are probably going to move up because all the supply is getting taken off of the market. So it will be a topic that I think we're going to see a lot of, over the next 5 years as rents start moving up.
Great. And while we're on the topic of rents moving up and supply, I want to move over to our next article. It's an article by Rent Cafe, and it's titled New Apartment Construction to Reach Historic High of 500,000 in 2024. 2 million rentals open by 2028. So this headline makes it seem like there's a nonstop growth of apartment supply in the U.S. over the next 4 years. However, I wanted to outline some key points while reading. So in the article, it states 2024 marks a historic milestone for apartment construction in the U.S. as the number of completions surpasses 500,000 units for the first time on record. So for the folks that are just listening to this podcast, the people who are watching on YouTube can see a graph right now that shows in 2024 there's about 518,000 apartments, which is a historic high. Over the next 4 years, you'll see a decline in new apartment deliveries on the market. But yeah, so we're going to reference this graph a little bit. However, demand for rentals in the U.S. continues to outstrip supply, even with all recent construction efforts. So Jamison, Heidi, can you guys shed light on what we're seeing in the Phoenix market in 2024? And then also, what can we expect with rents and the apartment market over the next 3 to 4 years?
Yeah, I think that it's important to look at things right now in 2024 and say this is a win for renters. This is a win for municipalities who have made good decisions and had incentives for developers to come in and build. because rents are flat and there's a lot of supply. And what ends up happening is there might be people who are living in an older building. Now there's a brand new building down the street that has some really nice incentives to move in. You might get a month or two rent, and that's what we're seeing. And they're moving into those buildings, and then that older building, now that unit becomes available and someone else moves in there, and there's just kind of this, when there's good supply like this, it's good for the market and it keeps things flat. This was all because interest rates were so low a few years ago. These 500,000 plus units were all planned 2 and 3 years ago, because it takes a long time to build an apartment, to get all the planning in place, to get the funding in place. So this is a win for all of those people involved, and I think that it's important to identify that and keep doing more of that. Things like rent control that we talked about previously, those things don't work. Additional supply is what works to keep rents flat.
Yeah. So also in this article, it says, following the record high of 518,000 apartments completed in 2024, developers are expected to deliver 440,000 new units in 2025. That's a 15% decline in new deliveries in the market. Then the pace of construction is projected to slow even more through 2027, when deliveries are expected to reach a 10-year low with only 319,000 rentals open nationwide. And then, so to Jamison's point, as we see this slow drop off of new deliveries coming on the market, we expect rents to rise pretty significantly.
And the biggest impact with all of that, the biggest input for all of this new supply is interest rates. Mm-hmm. Interest rates were really low. Cost of capital is really low. More people are going to take risks. They're going to get capital, go build these housing units. And now where interest rates are at, a lot of these plans have been put on ice for a while. And so they're seeing the same thing that we're seeing, and that is, as we get in the next few years, there's going to be a lack of supply. And so even though the idea behind what the Fed has been doing to take interest rates up to slow inflation down has worked temporarily, over the next few years we're going to see the impact of that, and rents are going to be moving up, and that's also a big part of inflation.
Yeah.
And the cost for folks renting is going to be higher because there isn't enough new stuff coming online.
Yeah. And I think with rents going up, developers understand this. They understand where the puck is going. So despite how high borrowing costs are right now, they're continuing to build. They want to keep building, get these projects finished, because they know that once supply drops off, rents go up, the value of their building is just going to skyrocket too.
Yeah. And when we look at the big metros that are building the most, with one exception, you have to look at where all this building is taking place. And the one exception is that New York in 2024 has the most new apartment units coming on. Mm-hmm. And New York is not in the Sun Belt or business-friendly state. But New York is New York. It's kind of its own thing. And
it's the exception to all rules.
It's the exception.
Just its own thing.
And the cost of housing there is obviously very, very expensive. So it's good that they're adding apartment units. But look at these other ones. So you got New York. The next one, Dallas, Texas. Austin, Texas. Then Phoenix, we're the fourth. Atlanta, Georgia. Houston, Texas. D.C. is also an outlier. Cost of rent there is also very high, much higher than the average. But then you go back to the Sun Belt, Charlotte, Miami, Nashville, Tampa, Orlando, San Antonio, Raleigh. So, some of these places like L.A., New York, Washington, D.C., where rent is really high. It's good to see New York and D.C. getting into this, but L.A. is way behind of where it needs to be. Yeah. And people are leaving California at a pretty good clip, and so they don't need as many new units to keep rents down, but rent is already high there. And so they need to get more incentives, I think, to attract more development there.
Yeah. And Phoenix coming in at number 4 is, really exciting. Have you guys seen Dune?
Yeah.
Do you know? Have you read
I
the
haven't
book
seen
or
it. I've heard it, but
I was reading how they describe Phoenix in this article. And for me, Phoenix is literally a ruckus. It says, once dubbed America's least sustainable city, Phoenix is now actively combating climate change and water scarcity in an effort to become the world's most sustainable desert city. So this shift has encouraged environmentally conscious businesses to come here, and then also more people to move to Arizona as well.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know this, but Phoenix is the 5th largest city in the United States, only behind New York, LA, Chicago, Houston, and then Phoenix is number 5. We have a lot of people who live here, a lot more people coming here. And the other thing a lot of people don't realize is that even though we have about 5 million people in the Phoenix metro area, we use less water now than we did in the 1950s when there was less than 1 million people here.
Wow.
and we have desert landscaping. We're very smart with our water, and we've gotten away from a lot of the farming that used to, in agricultural, that used to take a lot of water here, and it's more of an urban place to live. Not a lot of lawns here, and that's because we're trying to save that water, and I think we'll continue to innovate to be able to live and exist in the desert because we like the weather here outside of July and August, and the rest of the year it's great.
Yep.
I think one of the other things that we have to our advantage here in Phoenix is land. I mean, we have land to expand outward. So I went to dinner with my parents the other day, and we kind of went up into like the northwest area of Phoenix. There's a lot of new building going on up there. I mean, there's so much land. You've got all these like plants that we've been talking about, but there's room to grow. Where, you know, New York, you're really like stuck in there, and even though they're growing, it's going up. We've got room to grow out. A ton of room to keep growing.
Yep.
My sister lives on the northwest side of Phoenix, to your point, and it takes her 45 minutes to get to downtown Phoenix, but it just shows you how big and vast Phoenix is. So to your point, there's so much room for development here.
For sure.
I want to pivot to two topics that have a cause and effect relationship with each other, I think. The article is a Wall Street Journal article, and it's titled, U.S. Home Prices Hit Record High in June for the Second Consecutive Month. This is the latest sign that the housing market is unaffordable to millions of Americans. Typically, spring is the home buying season, usually the busiest time of the year for the housing market. However, home sales have declined in June for the fourth straight time on a monthly basis. Really, so there's two things at play here that we're seeing. Prices of homes are at an all-time high, and consequently, home sales are at historic lows. Lowest amount of sales since the Great Financial Crisis.
Yeah, and what we expected was when the Fed started taking interest rates from 3.5 to now, the 30-year mortgage is over 7%. We expected that housing prices would come down, and they haven't. They've stayed the same. So when you take a look at houses, which got very expensive during COVID, 2020, 21, 22, prices went up a lot. Now your cost of debt went up a lot. It's in most metros, it's 50% more costly to buy than to rent, and it's higher than it's ever been. That disparity between renting versus buying, and there's not really an end in sight. We expected that prices would slow down. They haven't. A lot of that's due to the people who have these low rate mortgages. They're not selling. They're staying put. We think, and I expect interest rates will go down going forward, but we're not going to go down in the 3.5% range again. But I know the 30-year has come down in the last few weeks. But yeah, it's going to be tough to continue to push people into this American dream of owning homes. I think a lot of younger folks have kind of moved away from that, and maybe owning a home happens in their late 30s and 40s instead of in their 20s or early 30s like it used to be, because prices are so high. They prefer to rent in a lot of ways with all their options that they have as renters, but prices of homes have not come down at all. There hasn't been any relief.
Yeah. And so that's the cause, which is the prices of homes are really high, and the effect is the share of young adults living at home continues to rise. So no longer are the days for empty nesting. The article states that 17% of young adults aged 25 to 35 are still living with their parents, compared to just 7% in 1970.
I want to know how many of those parents are charging their kids rent, because when my kids turn 18, rent goes into place. Nobody lives off this anymore.
That could probably change things. That gets people moving out quick
No
if they're
kidding.
paying rent.
Yeah.
That keeps people there, not having to pay rent. You don't want to pay $2,000 a month. You stay home for sure.
But I also think some parents are saying it's okay to stay a little longer because it's expensive to go do something else. And I think, this age range definitely includes people who are post-college. And I think that's one of the big changes culturally is post-college, it's pretty tough to move back in with your parents. But 17% now of people most likely post-college moving back in for maybe it's temporary, maybe there's something that's driving that, and it'll only be short term. But I think parents are being more lenient right now because everything is more expensive right now.
Sure. The other piece I think goes with it is a lot of these people saving up to buy their first home. maybe they were only planning on staying with their parents for a year while they saved up for a down payment. Now all of a sudden that same house they want to buy is, you've got to put way more down on it.
Yeah.
It just keeps building, and that ripple effect for sure.
Yeah, you got to do it for longer if that's the goal. And I have friends in that situation right now. And I think the other thing that you have to point out is that it's the millennials who are really the group that's driving this. Maybe millennials are just more comfortable staying with their parents a little bit longer, but at age 25, 27% of millennials live with their parents, and then 9% were still doing so at age 35. So Gen Z looks like they're going to be similar, where 30% of the 25-year-old Gen Zs now live at home. So that's a lot higher than prior generations that at 25, it's like, oh, I'm getting out of here. The millennials, maybe they just like their parents more. They want to keep hanging out. And the Gen Z,
I have a really
same.
hot take. So I think people just need to get married more because, one, you get the dual income, which makes buying a home much more affordable. I assume in 1970s more people were getting married.
Sure.
And then on top of that, it incentivizes you to move out. You don't want to live with your parents, with your significant other.
More your in-laws don't want to live with your parents for sure.
Exactly. So
My in-laws are great. I would 100% live with them. They're fabulous. Don't want to cause problems.
Nice
too.
disclaimer there.
yeah,
Yeah, that changes things for sure. But we know people are getting married later
Yeah.
than before as well. So all of this is kind of macro related. And the one thing that we always know and we can count on is that things are always going to change. People's behaviors are going to change, and incentives and the cost of things really drives a lot of that. Thank you for listening to our podcast, the Multifamily Masterclass. Please subscribe to get all of our new episodes.